Well, hello. I hope it's not too loud out there. Happy full moon in Scorpio / lunar eclipse. A partial lunar eclipse. In which case the moon will be plunged into darkness and, depending on the atmosphere, may appear slightly differently. Often doused in red, how appropriate for Scorpio. Also, my jam, although I do notice discomforts, which we'll get into, with Scorpio rules intimacies and deep thoughts and deep thinking, and on your body rules the hips. So 100%, I was talking to a friend yesterday and was just like, we're going to see some relationship drama. And of course, you know, couples arguing or exes being a weird thing. Which is always very funny. So if you find yourself thinking of an ex, blame the moon and don't go there. But with that also being said, Mars, Neptune, and Jupiter are all in Pisces, which are very... there's stronger fire elements within that line of communication, placed in a very water-ridden placement that I think is uncomfortable, but I feel like because Mars is kind of the root of that line, that there's like a level of integrity to the masculinity, to the fire, to the actionable, that is both challenged and also a little bit more ramped up. Like I guess as if it has something to prove. But we don't. We don't have shit to prove to anybody but ourselves. Mercury is also retrograde in Gemini with Ceres, and I feel like okay, well, Mercury in retrograde is always an interesting thing, but within Gemini, I feel like that's a lot of back and forth thinking, almost like trial and error. And because of the Mars placements and the Venus placements, I feel like there's a lot of, like I want to say antithetical, but it's almost like swapped stories. Eris and Chiron are also with Venus, in line with Venus in Aries, which is again the swap stories, because Venus isn't necessarily in its happiest place in Aries. Mars would be, and so you see that kind of like flip-flopped energy. And I feel like when you're in situations of discomfort, like, yeah, you feel like you have to prove something, you have to sort of like force your way through it upright, and that forcefulness is not really what gets us very far. Shit, maybe that's why people keep asking. I mean, people always ask about my ears, but I feel like more often lately I've had to be like anything in life, lots of lube, lots of patience. And my battery's gonna die. Jesus. Jupiter and Neptune are also in line. This is a very collective reprogramming. And then what is it? Uranus is still in Taurus. All of this is a very collective reprogramming of intimacy, like Uranus and Venus. I can't say for sure if this is a square. I don't necessarily know those aspects, but I do hear it as a conversation, and I think that's about our group care and our group identification and how we deal with relationships and how we deal with intimacy, and where that wantonness and need stems from. I know that's kind of a big concept, but please follow along. The Earth, Mercury, and the Sun, with Mercury in retrograde, are also, they're kind of in their own little line. And Mercury is very close in between us and the Sun. And I feel like it hasn't even been in retrograde long, and we all kind of noticed it or felt it. that is an amplification of heat. That's like a magnification of the heat. And the moon's not really blocking any of that. It's also taking a bit of that reflection. But I do feel like there's a bit of it still whispering in our ear. And that is, again, kind of going back to that group identification and how we identify with our relationships and intimacies and what have you in many, many senses, in micro senses and macro senses, in all and any relationships, and our relationships to ourselves, and our relationships to our bodies, and our relationships with the way that we want to move with all people, move with the group of world as a whole, move with our friends, move with our family, move with ourselves, move with our minds. I do feel like that's also an aspect of tension because there's a lot of, fire elements in water, and because Venus is in an interesting place or an odd place. And with the retrograde, it's a lot of friction, tension on the outside that we're then internalizing, and it's creating like a fricative nature within thoughts when it doesn't necessarily have to be that way. We can get more in tune with our thought patterns, our loving patterns, our sensual patterns within ourselves, to sort of sift through and organize or rationalize or make the most of all of that outside friction, all of that outside tension, all of that outside atmospheric pressure. Actually, that makes me really curious what this moon is going to look like. Like just saying that. So yeah, there's a lot of shit going on, truly. So with that, I thought it might be a great idea to pull some cards for everybody. But I'm also going to change this camera battery before it dies on me. So give me a second. Haha. Beautiful. Okay. All of that being said, we shall pull some cards and see what is going on. It's been so hot too, and it's so chill and weird and gloomy today and breezy. Again, with that antithetical nature, as if we are constantly changing sides or changing our minds. But that's also why retrograde is here, so we can reevaluate those situations and see what really matters in terms of deep connection, penetrative connection. And I don't mean that necessarily literally at all. The most penetrating thing about a Scorpio is their mind. Or about Scorpionic nature is their mind, their spirit. In the same way that the concept of death penetrates life in what feels like taking away, but is an entirely new creation. So let's see what is in the realms of that understanding. That was nice. Okay. Much like we are hanging out together, and I am reading cards for you, with you, sit wherever you are. Just make your hands available and out in front of you as if you have cards. We're going to take a deep breath in. On the exhale, imagine a shadow card rising into your hands. And pay attention to anything that you feel. Your body is always talking. Take a deep breath in. And exhale. Take a deep breath in. And exhale. Take a deep breath in. I lost count, but it was a lot of thoughts, a lot of things. It felt like, well, at first, like somebody was just like putting pressure on my shoulders, like it just, which, interestingly enough, when you have a particular issue with hips, a lot of times it's because we're carrying weights differently, or like not appropriately, or too much weight on our shoulders. That tends to drive weight down. If your shoulder's not in line, that will throw off your hips, da-da-da-da-da. Things like sciatica, oftentimes you'll feel that in the opposite shoulder. Things like messenger bags will fuck you up. It felt like added pressure, but at the same time, there was a feeling in my hands that was very much like a even pressure, and I don't know, like an old reach around. There's an element of how we're going to communicate these truths for the long term. Like Pluto came to mind, communication came to mind, and Pluto does kind of rule like the big picture of the many transits around it. As small as it is, as distant as it is, it's kind of the watcher and also like a chaperone. Like it's an active observer, and has much more influence than like kind of like it's the manager of the like the secret Wizard of Oz manager. And I know it's not a planet or whatever, but it does have weight and mass and does impact the bends in space-time as we move through these things. I feel like everything that we're going to learn during this retrograde is going to impact us in the long term. I feel like there's a lot of, again, thoughts and emotion, and while we bear down on that and sort of harbor all of that weight in our emotional reservoirs, which is, my collarbones are so beautiful, but in our emotional reservoirs, we fail to recognize how much that impacts the way we move. And again, we have all, like, Mars and fucking Pisces, and Pisces rules, like, your calves, which also are harborers of spiritual energy. I feel like, again, that's challenge to, it feels like a challenge to integrity, but the correct way through that is not going to be forcefulness. Again, there's already enough tension in the air. We do not need to add to that. Just take a breath. And, you know, sometimes I feel it in my body more than I would like to. And it's like stilling. It's like stilling vibration. Like you just have to hold it. Which is maybe, yeah, why that feeling in my shoulders also turned into almost like somebody was like supporting, you know, not weighing down on me, but was like almost like patting me on the back, kind of like a nice solid, yeah, like at the end of it, it felt really comforting and really good, but it did not at first. So seems pretty par for the course. All right, so with that, we pick some cards. Oh God, sorry, I forgot you can hear me. This is so perfect. Bottom of the deck, Knight of Wands, inverted, reversed, whatever. Which is very much that feeling. That Knight of Wands energy is when you feel that like heart racing. You feel like, I mean, he's very literally like rushing into war, and it's that heart racing, it's those palpitations that I said, and the answer to that is, again, not forcing your way through that, but stilling it. Like, if your hand is shaking, hold that hand, hold it tenderly, to quell and to, like, and you can still feel that heat. And you know what? That's a beautiful, fearless thing too, is to hold that flaming hand. It's, you know, a scary endeavor, but ultimately that's where the wisdom will grow. I'm not saying walk through a fire or anything, but you know what? That was also a tool of, or like a rite and a ritual, not necessarily a tool, I guess, but of many tribes as a rite of passage in many other indigenous nations, not my own, but was your right to personhood. I guess traditionally you would say right to manhood, but like everybody did it. And in those instances, again, group relationships, in those instances, heartbeats would sync up. That is actually scientifically proven. And this is perhaps absolutely what this opportunity is, in which case, not everybody's going to deal with it well. And we are, the goals of those situations, I think, is looking for an ego death. And that's perhaps the discomfort of both Mars and Aries placements is, but I feel like Mars may be more in line for an ego death, but Venus is sort of like boosting its ego, which is, again, those antithetical flip-flop stories where I've said it's almost like they just flipped. You know, like, and I say, I've said too before, like dating pre-pandemic or whatever, like, you know, if I dated men or I dated women, they would react a certain way, or, you know, the men traditionally would have, you know, jealousy issues and sort of, you know, very, very superficial scorpionic traits of like possession and ownership and things of that nature. And, you know, women, feminine nature is, you know, that Piscean, you know, deep thought, deep emotion, you know, tear felt, but that also can be anxious attachment kind of deals. And now that's kind of very flipped, at least in my experiences, both in my own relationships, my own acquaintanceships, as well as just sort of observing the world. One is looking to find more strength and the other is looking to find more softness, but we're only doing it in the ways that we've seen and the ways that have been shown to us, which is often not the answer either. If we're exemplifying masculinity by, or if we're putting forward masculinity by the examples that have been set before us, like, we're gonna be dicks. We're gonna be assholes. That's been the problem from the beginning. But I mean, that's very true. I think people are failing to recognize that they have slowly but surely become the very thing that they used to loathe, just in new ways. And that I've seen in literally everywhere. But we can talk more about that independently if you'd like. Okay. Three of Swords, Wheel of Fortune, and Tower. The Tower is very much the outcome of this eclipse season and full moon. And I've said something recently about how it's a very penetrating card, but it fell reverse in that situation, and this is about the ways in which we penetrate the world, penetrate ourselves, like the ways in which we put forth that, and again, integrity, again, uprightness, and of a very phallic nature, like, bear with me, it's there's so much more excitement when you accept the softness, and I think that's very much the nature. Like, I'm not just saying the world is a raging heart-on, although it's summer, the world does, but the ways in which we move forth with that can have more integrity, can have more uprightness, like, and if we're not careful with that, we could end up breaking things, you know, breaking relationships, breaking friendships, breaking lines of communication. So yes, I'm talking about fallacies and fucking penetration, but like, I mean it metaphorically, spiritually so. Because again, the most penetrating aspect of a Scorpio is their mind. And the most penetrating aspect of a Scorpio full moon is going to be the ways in which that makes you think. I mean, yes, there will be outside occurrences, but the ways in which we think and the ways in which we internalize those situations are going to be much more of the focus. Because as intense and visceral and sensory and literal as it may be, there's also always something unseen. Scorpio energy rules the hidden, the occult in a lot of ways. And so that will, and Mercury retrogrades in Gemini, which is an air sign, which is all about thoughts, which is all about observations and knowledge. So fucking absorb that before you act. Absorb all of that, sift through it, recognize it, play with it before you act. And maybe that's exactly it. Find a playful nature, because these are very intense cards. And times like that can feel very make or break, and that's not to say that they aren't, but that is to say that they don't necessarily have to be handled with white gloves. These are going to be messy cards, just to be blunt. The Three of Swords, like these are very intense and kind of, I feel like some people might be a little skeeved by these cards, or like scared. The Three of Swords is an intense card, is a painful card, but it's also a card of the most pleasure, like the possibility of the most pleasure. And that's true just like dichotomously so, and also in a very literal sense, because the point in your brain that understands pain is also the point in your brain that understands pleasure. The two dwell in the same household, I suppose. Dwell in the same space. They exist in the same line. I think whenever we deal with group connections or relationships or intimacy, or have anything to do with again, like genital area, root chakra area, we're dealing with so much more than just like physical attraction. This is very much, I mean, and anytime we go through memories of those experiences, it really teaches us a lot more about ourselves. And that's very much what this card is going for. I don't necessarily think it's like, oh, heartbreak is on your way. But I do think that there's perhaps some wounds that have not been bandaged fully. Or perhaps some wounds that will be tender, if not reopened. And you know what? That's also true just with the changes in the fucking weather. Like, you know, it rained one day and then it's super fucking nice the next day, and like scar tissue those skin cells will condense and expand or release, depending on barometric pressure, depending on the atmosphere. And that's very much happening on a spiritual level. And that will, I feel like that'll put us in an interesting place of keep it in a place of self-analysis, not of self-deprecation. Because I feel like when we go down those roads, it can be like, well, it's because I'm not da-da-da-da-da. And like, I've had a lot of people actually like express, I don't know, body things to me lately. And I feel like that's very connected. Like, it's almost as if other people will want us more because, like, when we start to focus on that, but the only reason we haven't focused on that is because we don't want ourselves enough. And so ultimately that's, again, the place to start. And the Three of Swords is, you know, a walk down that memory lane, but it's also there to show you that that your blood is potent, that your experience is potent, and that, again, that creates more possibility for love. So don't get hung up on the past, don't get hung up on heartbreak, don't get hung up on loneliness, don't get hung up on any of that, because it's only been there as lesson, and because it is a major part of your integrity in relationships, your uprightness in relationships, the ways in which that you offer yourself to the world in the most magical ways, in the most memorable ways, truly. There's a lot of nostalgia there, but I feel like if you let it, it can be more of a safety net than a getting tangled in a fishnet kind of deal. I hope that makes sense. And you know what? Like, even that just gives me this like visual of like the way that our synapses connect in our brains, and perhaps that's a big part of this card and coming up in the first right, as well as like a time to reprogram memories. You know, like, do we go back? Do we remember exes or breakups, you know, fondly or with great disdain, and why is that? And how can we sort of rewire that connection so that it doesn't hold that weight? And again, weights. And when we're not not actualizing that, or we're not you know, thoroughly going through it or actually like working on it, then yeah, unbeknownst, we're putting a lot of pressure on our hips, and that's ultimately going to bog us down, close us off from ourselves, close us off from connection, close us off in many ways, shape, and form. Damn, that really came together perfectly. The Wheel of Fortune is inverted. This is the only card that is inverted. And 100% I just feel like that reiterates exactly that. Like, this can go where you make it. If you force, you're going to stop the wheel altogether. But if you, like I said, you know, go through that web, use it as a safety net rather than as a tangling and an overwhelm and igniting this guy, then you can, like, this card is present and can move forward for a reason. Like, it's a, again, potentiality. And that is a big part of 2020. There's a law in physics called Bourne's Law that is calculating the possibility of a wave of light or something like that. But you're squaring the square, and that's very much what 2022 is squaring 2020. And it's creating, it's a year of possibility, it's a year of potentiality, it's a year of whatever the fuck you can make it. And that goes both ways, you know, like, for the amount of times that we think the worst, like, this is the opportunity to think of the absolute and what seems impossible best. And likewise, if you believe in the absolute and most impossible best, then just as far of a trajectory as that possibility has, there is an equal measure on the opposite side of that. And that's very much, again, the energies that Venus and Mars have been having in the last couple of times that I've done this, but definitely more so these days, or more so within this. Okay. L numbers. You know, the Tower is also not so scary. It's very much also about a leap of faith. Numerically, it boils down to 7, which is kind of like angel grace, like wish number, blessing number, yada yada yada. And I don't think, at least right now, feel that it's not about escaping to safety or anything like that, but it is about, like, falling in love with yourself. Like, allow yourself to free fall. The ways in which we sort of, like, give way to the whimsical and you know, imagine so many possibilities in other people, in relationships, is the leap of faith and the falling in love that we ought to have with ourselves. And that is not an escapism, that is an incredible arrival. I love that. Oh, Tower. You and I are getting real cool. Okay. That's way too bad. Okay. Much like last time, we'll take 3 deep breaths together. Have your hands out as if there's cards in front of you. Take a deep breath in. On the exit breath, imagine a shadow card rising into your hands. Pay attention to what you feel. Yada, yada, yada. Take a deep breath in. And exhale. Take a deep breath in. And exhale. Take a deep breath in. And exhale. Shadow card. Okay. That was interesting. It was like all of that just traveled down and like out my fingertips and like a wave crashing, like and letting everything fall back into place. And maybe that's the obliteration that is about to happen, but it's the wave is emotional. The wave is an emotional break and reordering. That can mean many things. Mental health has been really tough. I'm not saying anybody's going to have a breakdown, but I am going to say be gentle with yourself. Don't let that intensity ride you to that point or to that edge. But also, what a release to let it go, let it fall apart, and let it fall back to be reabsorbed into the whole in a new place, to make a new wave entirely, which is a beautiful thing, which is a great thing, which is an important thing, and I can feel it all over my body, my God. So yeah, I don't mean that to be like fucking foreboding or anything, but this is all very emotional nature. It's all very internal. And for as much as this is a fire card, this Knight of Wands, that feeling, that internal energy is 70% of our body, water, fucking boiling and rapid. So even the most heated of moments is also about what the water in our bodies is doing, what the water in our very literal physical bodies, but also just our spiritual nature, the water element in our inner cosmos, our inner elemental atmosphere. What did I say about them sevens? My God. We got 3 all together. There we go. That's where they went. Major 7. Cataclysmic chords. And of course this 5 of diamonds underneath the Wheel of Fortune, which is half-mast again, possibility. But I do feel like it is a relinquishing of doubt or uncertainty in a lot of ways. And you know what? Again, when we force our way through these things, a lot of that's because we're not certain. When you're forceful, it's because you don't fucking know. When you're gentle, it's because you know it will be what it will be. You know it will be what it is meant to be. You know it'll be what it is needed to be. You know that it will fall into its perfect position. And I don't mean perfection in the sense that we understand it. I mean perfection as just as what is meant to be, where things are meant to fall. And some people, as perfect as we think they are, aren't necessarily meant to be a perfect fit. Likewise ideas, you know, that takes some finesse too. 7 of spades, 7 of hearts, 7 of clubs. Air, water, fire. And the 5 is the earth. How ironic to ground in creation. If the earth element is the 5s, and that would essentially correspond to like Tiperet or the sun. Which is creativity, which is ideas. It's kind of like the basin that we throw all of this information into to like then pull out and see what comes of it. You know, consider it the cauldron, I suppose you could. And maybe what we have to put in that is ideas and possibilities and what we want to see, and maybe what we have to put in that is memories and bullshit. But it is about making something with that. And maybe that's not necessarily, it doesn't have to be a tangible thing, but why the fuck not, you know? We all ought to fucking write more letters to ourselves. There's definitely some letters that I've written and never sent. And you burn it, and you send it to the ether, and just like that wave crashes, it reabsorbs into the whole to become something new altogether. Seven of Hearts is under the Tower, and when this card is inverted, I feel like it's when we deny ourselves the ability or you know, the space to not be okay. You know, we don't necessarily have to just always be like, good, thumbs up, when like you're fucking not. The irony of social life is how often we're asked, how are we? And how often we do not give a real answer. Or give a very superficial answer, or just are not honest about it altogether. Granted, that's because people ask and they don't really fucking care. But again, like hold space for yourself in that manner. And you know what? Sometimes maybe, yeah, we just have to answer honestly and be like, yeah, today is not my day. I'm not okay. Admitting that to yourself is a very strong thing to do. And we go back to that weird fucking Aries, weird fucking Mars placement with Neptune and Jupiter, and new ways in which we can navigate and identify with that concept. Perhaps the strongest thing we can do is admit when we are not okay. Perhaps the hardest thing we can do is admit when we need help and ask for it. And that seems like it would be a very emasculating thing to do, but in reality, that's like the ultimate fucking man, like the ultimate fucking masculine energy, the ultimate divine masculine that is in tune with their emotional energy in such a way that they can still hold and harbor and they can still honor and protect, but they can also nurture as well. And again, I don't mean that literally, like you can be whatever gender, we all have both energies in us at all times. Everything is queer, it's just physics. But, you know, like, that's what I said from the beginning, that antithetical kind of like swapping of stories, and ultimately that bringing more power to the surface, or bringing more, yeah, like bringing more solidified, ultimate, integral power. In the way that we rock this joint with this Wheel of Fortune. The Seven of Swords underneath the Three of Hearts. I mean, not Three of Hearts, Three of Swords. Swords, 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 all the swords together. 10 swords at that. Ooh, interesting. Interesting. Because the Ten of Swords is a very, it came up last time, I think. It's a very intense card. Looks a little gloomy. So these two energies would essentially make that. But the way that they're divided is, you know, relinquishing any of that pain or bad memories or what have you again, in good faith. It's almost like turning it over to, like, I would imagine that this is where the idea of like confession and whatever came from, in its purity, not in the way that it was actualized, because actually it was a fucking financial scam and like some hierarchical bullshits. Fuck organized religion and organized government. But that's a big part of prayer, however you do it, you know, whatever you believe in. You know, even if you believe in the earth, you take what you want to let go and you send it to the earth. And, you know, group healing things I've done will take that person's pain and we send it to the earth. And that's the relinquishing of it. That's letting the wave crash. That's throwing it into the cauldron and letting it burn. That is also, you know, repentance and da-da-da-da-da. Just like without the bullshit. Without the nonsense, and like with truth and love and all of the things that are meant to be a part of those rituals. Or just natural actions, because life's a fucking prayer, life's a fucking ritual. Everything that you ought to do with meditation. Ultimately, that's the goal. It's not about 15 minutes a day. It is about walking meditation. It's about being that. And this is very much that sort of story. Not to bring religion into it, that was just the most fucking literal way of describing it that I could think of. And the Seven of Swords on its own is a very, it's a card that you can carry with you for a long time. It's a card of a lesson and a grace and a blessing that will continue to move you forward steadily and peacefully. And that is the big reward of reprogramming and letting that go. And that's again where you find that safety net rather than that tangled web. The Seven of Wands with this Knight of Wands. I feel like where these wands could be aggression, this card also reads a lot of joy. Like joy and ease and almost like stress-free, which is antithetical to this Knight of Wands, because he's very stressed out. He's going into war, and he's covered in fire. But I feel like this is the converse outcome of, like, if we do not give into that fire, like I said, and we hold that hand gracefully, gently, with kindness, with love, with understanding of self and of others, then that affords us so many more options to observe and interact with. And that in a way makes the whole world like this, every interaction sort of this, beautiful part of a puzzle. And, it takes out the judgment of that interaction and allows every interaction to just be, and to just be there for what it is, whatever purpose it is. Like, this character is very much like window shopping, and not that people are things that we can shop with, but like the idea of that is almost like it's very joyful, it's very laissez-faire, like you're not stressed about what you have and what you don't have, you're just kind of appreciating. And that is a beautiful place to be, rather than on guard, defensive, ready to fucking throw down, all of those things. Like, we think that strength and integrity comes from being like, what you say, I'm gonna fuck you up. But maybe this is the time to try, like, hey, what I'm hearing is this, did I get that right? Like, what I'm hearing is da-da-da-da, am I understanding you? Like, I just want to understand you. I just want to understand the situation. I just want to, advance my empathy skills. And I feel like I talked about this recently too. Somebody was talking to me about the whole Johnny Depp and Amber Heard thing, and it had dawned on me that, like, watching the world sort of pick sides and all of that jazz, and like there's a lot to be said about it, but I also think it's an incredible opportunity to try and see yourself on both sides, try and see, because we all have been the asshole and the victim, we all have been, like, in some way, shape, or form. And if we think that we haven't, been, well, that's a lack of self-awareness. And so that is very, that's occurring at this current time for a reason. Everything's kind of in line for this sort of ego death and self-actualization. My camera's overheating, so I'm going to leave it at that and not continue to ramble on. But I hope that gives you a little nugget of peace and ease to take with you in these raging waters, be it outside or inside. And with that, I bid you adieu. Party on. And I will see you later.